Okay, so this is the first video of two videos about independence movements. And we're going to start with India because this is where the pattern of independence is established. And we want to see if this will play out similarly in Africa and Asia. So, side note, I'm making this during the school day, so hopefully no one will interrupt. And maybe you can also hear Mr. Healy there in the background. Okay. So, let's go back in time. Now, these initial slides, you probably don't need to take notes. This should be familiar to you by now and exist in other forms. We've seen this in the movie, but if you forget, maybe jot down some of these things that are underlined. Those are the important vocabulary words. But remember, two nationalist groups have formed, the Indian National Congress and the Muslim League. Here's the National Congress and Muslim League. And as you recall, these are the groups fighting for self-rule or independence. And then remember, millions of Indians fight in World War I. And after World War I, that's when things get tense, right? Because Indian soldiers have put their lives on the line, and they expect at least some reform, or at most self-rule. But when they come back from the war and are treated as second-class citizens, they start to get pretty feisty and get a little angry, especially after sacrificing their lives. So radicals in these nationalist movements begin to carry out acts of violence. And so in response, the British passed the Rowlatt Acts in 1919. And so you can read there that they can put protesters in jail without trial. And the British, they know civil rights. I mean, the Indians know what civil rights are and what the British have, so this is a huge slap in their face. So if you recall, one of the major turning points in Indian-British relations is the Amritsar massacre. I'm sure we don't need to review this too much, as it's quite an indelible moment in the film. But remember, thousands of Hindus and Muslims have gathered in Amritsar in northern India, and you recall right there, it's not only a religious festival, but they also kind of talk about some political issues and listen to speeches. And the British, of course, are nervous, right? When Muslims and Hindus are gathering together and organizing, then they probably know they're in trouble. So you remember the British commander just opens fire and kills a lot of people. So what are the results? Well, now it's no longer like, oh, we want self-rule, we want independence, get out, Great Britain. So 400 people are killed, 1,200 are wounded. I mean, this is just, even some British people are a little shocked about what occurred here. And so, like all of a sudden, overnight, millions of Indians go from loyal subjects to nationalists. And this is where Gandhi then can emerge as a leader of this movement. So here is some background here on Gandhi, just as a review, but I wanted to highlight once again that he takes a religious approach to political activity. And if you recall, throughout the film, he alludes to all religions: Islam, Christianity, Hinduism, Jainism. He kind of invents his own word here, which I won't butcher by trying to say, adherence to truth. And this is what kind of is inside you that helps motivate you to do the right thing, or to do the right thing even against overwhelming odds. Martin Luther King, who will be a follower of Gandhi and taught by some of Gandhi's people, he'll call it soul force. This is what you have within you. And of course, ahimsa, a religious belief of nonviolence. So this is what Gandhi believes and helps motivate him to talk to his followers and to search out for ways to achieve their goals without violence. So of course the most famous method here is civil disobedience, which is the deliberate public refusal to obey an unjust law. So he says, we don't have to be passive about this, and this is where he saw being feisty but being nonviolent. So they carried out boycotts and strikes, demonstrations, and we've seen that throughout the film. Most famous, of course, is the Salt March of 1930. As a review, remember, they had passed these laws, the Salt Acts, that said Indians could only buy salt from the British government. So then, to protest this, right, they did this 240-mile march to the sea. And if you recall in the film, right, Gandhi is making his own salt. Others also demonstrate in front of a salt mill, if you remember that in the film. They are beaten but don't resist. 60,000 people are arrested over this. By this point, American and British journalists are following him. It's in the world newspapers, maybe out of some shame, I don't know. The British decide to pass the Government of India Act in 1955. So, limited self-rule, some democratic elections. Problem now, which we'll continue to see, is this mounting tension between Hindus and Muslims. So when World War II starts, I think this whole process is interrupted by the war, and tensions mount then between the Indians and the British. So you've got not only Indians themselves, Muslims and Hindus, kind of disagreeing about the future of India, but also Indians kind of are conflicted on how to deal with the British. So World War II was another turning point. During the war, once again, millions of Indian soldiers participate, and this is the tension between Indians and British. Some Indians still feel themselves as British citizens of the empire. It's their duty to fight. But Gandhi urges non-cooperation with the British. He doesn't think they should go and fight this war. So he is arrested in the midst of World War II. So after the war, the British are confronted with this question. If you were fighting a war about freedom, against the tyranny of Hitler, then how can you maintain your colonies when you are also tyrants in India, in Africa, in Southeast Asia? And also the ever-pragmatic British, they're faced with enormous debt. And if you recall, those of you who did those imperialism DBQs, how expensive it is to maintain colonies. So if they start thinking about independence, who then should rule, Muslims or Hindus? Remember, the Mughal dynasty, which was ruling India before the British got there, is an Islamic dynasty. So Muslims have sort of been in power for a long time, and the British worked with those guys when they took over. So now the idea that, of course, they're going to be an independent nation, the tension continues to rise between Muslims and Hindus. There's 100 million Muslims in India, 350 million Hindus, so you can see the numbers there. The Muslims, remember, are led by Muhammad Ali Jinnah, a name in your SOL packet, and something handy to remember. And he starts to resist attempts to be included, right? Here he is with Gandhi. I think they were trying to include him and other Muslims in this new government, but he kind of resists this. So the British say, you know what, why don't we just split it up? Why don't we partition India into the Muslim section and a Hindu section? And when they start to put that out there, there's this massive riot, 4 days of riots in Calcutta, 5,000 dead, 15,000 wounded. I believe this is shown in the end of Gandhi. Gandhi fasts, almost to death for this violence to stop. So it seems clear that they've got a partition. So on July 16th, 1947, India becomes an independent nation and then is immediately divided between India and West and East Pakistan. So this is the Muslim part and this is the Hindu part. But as we've learned with Germany and we've learned with Korea, you just can't divide a country, right? So 10 million people are on the move. It's this massive migration as people try to go to their right place, right, where their co-religionists live. Violence begins. Muslims are killing Sikhs who want to go to India. Hindus and Sikhs are killing Muslims who go to Pakistan. Everybody's killing everybody. 1 million people die in the fight over partition and where people belong. Gandhi's response: what is there to celebrate? I see nothing but rivers of blood. So this is devastating after working so hard to maintain nonviolence. So this is India, right? The British Raj, when they controlled it. And this is it today. So here is West Pakistan and East Pakistan, which today is Bangladesh. So you can see this is where the partition was. So these are the Muslim concentrated parts. This arrow is pointing to some disputed territory to this day, Kashmir. So you can see, if you follow the news of this region, it's always kind of tense. There's Amritsar. And what? There's Tibet. We were talking about Tibet earlier. Okay. So, after independence, Nehru, if you recall, a character in the film, he becomes the first prime minister of an independent India, and he led a movement for a lot of newly independent nations to be neutral in the Cold War. And we've talked about that in class, called the non-alignment movement. And so he worked to build unity, right, in his new country, democracy, needed social reforms, economic modernization. So he had a huge job set out for him to work with his new country. So he died in 1966, and his daughter, Indira Gandhi, will become the next prime minister. She too is also influential in Indian history, and more about her later. But I know you're noticing, what? Yeah, that's right, India, women, prime minister. Has the United States had a woman president? No, don't get me started. Okay, so, in case you're wondering, Pakistan, I think you're saying to yourself, hey, there's no West Pakistan. That's true. So there's tension between East and West Pakistan, right? It's separated by 1,000 miles of India. There's a different culture. While they're both Muslims, they have a different language, different culture, different geography, different ethnic groups. So how do you make one country when it's split up between 1,000 miles of India? So by 1970, there's tension. This comes to a turning point, and there's this horrific tidal wave, and a tsunami hits East Pakistan. And a lot of people believe that East Pakistan did not get the money and funding from West Pakistan that they needed. So in 1971, they declare itself independent, and they call themselves Bangladesh. Civil war is fought, but as you know, it is Bangladesh to this day. Boom. That's it. So stay tuned. This was a little bit long, 12 minutes, but we will then stay tuned for video on African independence.